their own nation, excellent in their own language, understanding their own culture, and often that means their own religion. I think in Europe, institutionally, we're Christian-based, and I think that's something that people like to shy away from. It's much more apparent, for example, in the Middle East, people aren't ashamed to voice that, as we seem to be in Europe. So in the smaller countries, children are going to school, brilliant in their own culture and language, and also brilliant in English. And I think everyone is struggling to find the solution, and it's right under our noses. And so you can go and take the Danish curriculum, and you just take out Danish and put in Arabic. Or you take the Danish curriculum and you take out Danish and you put in Sudanese. And you do that with culture and language, or you do it with Indian, or whatever it is. And it's working in the smaller countries brilliantly. These guys are incredible, and they are also furiously nationalistic in their own countries, understanding of their own religions and their own cultures, but deployable globally. So I think that's where it's going. I struggle with the fact that no one seems to have realized it, even though it's going on under our noses. And we can see that these smaller European countries are punching above their weight because of that.
Thank you very much. Okay, any questions from the floor? Yes.
My question is to Mr. Niall Brennan. You said education is a business. So do you think we should make it a business here in Qatar? Because it is a birthright of every child and duty of parents to give them education, quality education. So each year the fees is increased and salaries of expats still remain the same. So how do you expect us to fulfill that? And one more question. So don't you think you should be at least giving free education for meritorious students? Thank you.
Thank you. I think everything is a business, and that's the way that the world is, whether or rightly or wrongly. And the only currency in the world is currency, it is generally for those people with more currency to act in philanthropic ways, and I think that's just the way it is. So all schools have to be businesses because they have to manage their budgets. What they don't have to be is aggressive businesses, and they don't have to. They have to deliver an ethical offering, and we deal in education, we deal in children, and therefore it is much more for us in the sector to be ethical than it is, for example, bankers. It seems to be understood that bankers can charge whatever they want. I think it is still taken that the education business should be ethical. Here the challenge is artificially controlled school fees, where the system for management of school fees is entirely arbitrary, and there is no rule book. And that is a challenge, and then especially when schools are faced with, for example, housing went up, certainly in the area where our school is 25% last year. And that's where we accommodate our staff. So these are challenges, and these are influences on the education sector that we can't control. And then, of course, the government is trying to control us. I do think that private education in this country is too expensive. I do think at the top end there are organisations making significant amounts of money, and I do think while they are businesses, that is unethical. That being said, that is education for rich people, but delivered by rich people. And to be honest, it doesn't really matter. The big challenge is education for the poorer people, where they're not getting the quality. The rich people can afford quality. The rich people can afford to decide what they want to do. The poor people can't. And so it's education for the poorer expatriates, where they don't have the luxury of choice. Which is the challenge, and I think that's where we should be looking at more closely. Is schooling for the majority of expats where they struggle, and being able to deliver that properly. Oh, and sorry, and just on you're talking about scholarships. Yeah, absolutely. I think in every country in the world we have scholarships, and I think it would be correct for schools to offer them. the problem is with scholarships is awarding scholarships is a financial line that can, if a child joins you at 3 and leaves you at 18, it can be for 15 years. And what the government needs to do is allow schools to financially plan for 15 years and therefore provide a non-arbitrary set of school fee instructions. If a school can plan financially for 15 years, then it can award scholarships for 15 years. But because it's done on a year-on-year basis, schools can't award a scholarship because they don't know what financial position they'll be in next year. That's the issue. That being said, I think that there is enough money in the system for people to be doing that, and it's something that I would support.
Great, thank you. There's another question here. Yep.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So I don't assign my comment to any one of the respected speaker. Thanks for all. I am economist. We know now that economic crises are beating hard the all comprehensive, not only in Qatar, the Gulf area, even in Europe. I was in Germany, in Austria, in the United States, which is indebted with $18 trillion. So what I say, austerity measures is taken everywhere. I mean, and pricing services, more taxes, additional value, and so. So I think Qatar, I thank Qatar for resisting all this block and hope in the future. For housing, why don't we encourage FDI, foreign direct investment from abroad for housing here, that can we raise the supply, for example. So there is a lot of measures, but I think that this is a crisis which beating everywhere, deterioration of oil prices, glut in the gas market. So I think we have to take this in consideration. About the inhabitants in Qatar, I don't think 2.5 million. I think 1.8 maybe. To be sure of statistics, I'm not sure, but to revive this. Thanks for all.
Okay, thank you. Maybe, Doctor, you had the most numbers and facts and figures in your presentation, so if you want to address that. Is there anything particular about Qatar in this economic crisis?
I mean, once again, probably the housing, I can leave it for my colleague there. But since 2013, 2014, the cost of housing has declined for the first time by 0.01%. I mean, however, once again, going into the World Cup will attract more people to come into Qatar. On the other hand, the statistics of the Ministry of Development Planning is also indicating that there is more supply of housing provided in the last few years, which actually resulted in this decline in the housing price. But generally, I agree completely with you that there is a comprehensive world economic crisis in the United States, in Europe, in Southeast Asia. I mean, like you mentioned, the debt crisis in the US is an indication of how malicious the economies are led. So, but I mean, once again, I mean, we are thankful here in Qatar.
Do you have anything to add on Hazel?
I would like to respond, but I don't know what to say. Foreign direct investment is good for any country. But of course, this is a government decision whether they would allow foreigners to invest directly into housing. I think the current problem with housing is not the availability. There are many apartments, many villas standing empty. But those villas and apartments are catering for a type of class that there is no need for currently. And that's why it's still expensive, because based on market realities, the owner of that villa paid so much money to the bank to construct that. And he's wanting a rental that can satisfy his need on that. But the need is for lower class housing and more smaller type of units. And that need should be encouraged amongst the Qatari investors.
Okay, yes, down the back.
I just have a question for Mr. Neil. I just would like to add one concern regarding private schools. When parents have a child with some kind of disabilities, and I'm not talking here about severe disabilities, very mild cases, when they send their kids to private schools, they have been asked to pay double fees. So if I'm sending my child to an American school, and if I am lucky that they accepted him, I would be asked to pay extra fees equal to the regular fees of the school just to hire a shadow or an assistant in the classroom for my child. And I know some cases, some parents had to leave Qatar because of the extreme high expenses for their children. And we need to know that Qatar is having the inclusive education policy that allows all the children to have access to the school system free. Thank you.
Thank you. The understanding the special educational need provision in schools anywhere in the world is extremely challenging. What it basically means is if my child has a special educational need, and for example, Mr. Christian's doesn't, then my child is demanding more time and more resources than Mr. Christian's, and that is inherently unfair. But then, of course, my child needs it, and so it should have that supply, and that's a challenge in every country. In the Middle East, generally, the provision for special educational needs is not particularly good because there's not a particular demand for it. For example, in Europe and in Asia, the provision at state level is quite good, and therefore if you have a child with special educational needs, generally most parents will stay in their home countries, and therefore expatriates here generally don't have children with special educational needs, which means therefore that the market for special educational needs, certainly in the Middle East, is very, very small and therefore very specialist and very expensive. It's a question of responsibility and where responsibility for those special educational needs lies. Does it lie with the government? And I would say that that's quite challenging. Does it lie with the parent? That certainly is very challenging on the parent. Or does it lie with the school? And I think then the rest of the school body would argue that all children should receive the same resources. So it is a challenge. I don't think anyone globally has got it right yet. And I think this will be a challenge moving on. Just in particular to answer your question about school fees, the Minister of Education is very clear on what a school can charge and what it cannot. And those numbers should be published by the school on their website and also in their school offices for everyone to see. A school is not allowed to charge anything more than that on that document, and therefore it may be that you might want to challenge on your own case for that. That being said, if the solution is that a shadow teacher is provided because a child needs it and the parents have to foot that bill, then I can't really see the solution because I can't see why it is a school's responsibility to foot that bill, and so probably it then falls to the government. And I think the government would struggle to foot that bill. So I'm not sure if it's right that you're getting charged, but I'm not really sure who else should be. Thank you.
Yes.
Again, Mr. Neil, and I hope I pronounced your name right. I'm asking you, since you are an owner and a principal of an international school, about the entrance exams that are widely used in most international schools. I've heard that a lot of school children are denied access to school because of what they earned on those exams. And I'm not talking about old children. I'm talking about first, second, and third graders who can easily come to acquire those skills. Why am I denied access if my child is not good in math or language? And he's only first and second graders. And what is your addition as an international school? Thank you.
I agree with you. A school should be there to make your child good at maths, not to have your child good at maths before he arrives. And surely the whole idea of a school is to teach. That being said, here the challenges generally are with numbers. And so in private schools, there'll be two types of schools. Schools that academically stream, and therefore they only take bright and gifted children. And that's a policy decision by the school. And if a private school chooses to do that, then it's private and it can. There are pros and cons for educationally streaming children, even at a very young age. Other schools don't academically stream, and I think the understanding is then that, for example, if you have a boy and a girl, I'm sorry to say, your girl is probably going to be, at a younger age, brighter and faster than the boy. And therefore, you get sometimes in some schools where they'll accept the girl but not the boy. And I struggle with that personally, because I think schools should be more family orientated. Generally, the boys will catch up. So for academically streaming, that's the policy of the school. For schools that don't academically stream, the entrance tests, I think they should have an entrance test, and what it is to work out whether a child can access the curriculum. I would say most children can. The issue is that schools charge for these tests, and I feel it's unethical to put 100 children through a test to only select 3. Because, of course, what you're doing is you're having a child passing a test but not getting a place, and I think that's a very difficult message to send to a child. So I would advocate that you should only test if a place is available, and should the child pass that test for that place, that they get that place. But also there are a lot of other factors. There is enormous demand, and sometimes tests are used to narrow that demand. Normally there are thousands of applications for limited places.
Sorry, could we just use the microphone, maybe just for translation purposes? Sorry.
That's one of the things that I had an issue with, is that they had a grade vacancy. A child didn't pass that exam, and he's only secondary grader, and they still denied him access. That's he didn't pass the, I don't know what you call it, entrance exam, diagnostic tests. I don't know what term do you use for those exams. But he was denied access, and he's only a secondary grader. And they had a great vacancy. They've told me that they'll only call me because they have a vacancy in that grade. But still, they denied him access. So that's, I want to understand the other factors that would prevent a child to go to school because of his grades on those.
I think parents need to understand first that in private education, parents don't have a right to send their child to a certain school, and I think a lot of parents don't understand that. Private education facilities are private, and while they should be fair, they are private. There are also a lot of other factors, I think, and certainly from my own knowledge, that that schools have to consider. And so I can't comment on your specific case, but a couple of examples for our school. We as a policy try to be about 55% girls and 45% boys, because we understand that makes for a better school, and we have positive results. And certainly, for example, where we at Park House are, I'm very careful about my exposure to Qatar Airways employees, because we're on the other side of town where the airport is, and Qatar Airways last year announced the building of their own school, and should I have half of my school leave, then it would damage the school. So, for example, those are two factors that are nothing to do with education, that would influence selection. I can't comment on your